Hello viewers, Chief here. For those of you that might have seen the first episode of the folding a piece of A4 paper 10 times, I thought we might have a crack at folding it another 10 times using the same piece of paper. For those of you who haven't seen the first instalment, click on the left here and hit pause and go back and watch the first episode and then come back and watch this one once it's done. Okay, so we've got the original piece of paper that we folded 10 times. We've examined that. Here it is. I actually kept it. You can see that it's in a reasonable condition. We're going to fold this little piece of paper another 10 times and examine it each time and see how it pulls up and see if we can get the 20 without it deteriorating too much. We'll come back in a moment with the first fold. Rightio, here we have the 11th fold of this piece of paper. And again, it's still very supple, very easy to fold up and screw up. It's very easy to unfold. As you can see, it doesn't really sit very flat. But it still sort of looks like a piece of paper. The edges are becoming very crumpled and rumpled and twisted. The side profile's a bit irregular, but that's what I would come to expect. This little tear that we had in the corner in the first episode is not really opening up too much. But it's still there. It's a bit of a high point there, a bit of a ridge. Alright, that's 11 folds. We'll give it number 12 and we'll have a look after that. Okay, here we have the 12th fold, and it's becoming extremely easy to screw up this piece of paper. Unfolding it is fairly easy as well, and as you can see, it doesn't sit very flat at all. There's a lot of bumps and grinds and high points and low points on there. Again, this little tear that was there originally is surprisingly not opening up, although the edges are very frayed. As you can see on the edge there, there's a very deep profile in the outline of the paper with the surrounds. We'll give it fold number 13 and see how we go after that one. Right, here's fold number 13, and as we can see, it's becoming very ragged and lots of high points on the edges there. It seems to be deteriorating quite badly around the edges, but not so much in the interior parts of the paper where we had our little test dots there. You can see more of the red ink is starting to run, especially as these high points are rubbing together, as I suggested in the first video. Because the ink soaked through the paper, that's fine, so it would be well and truly stained. But with rubbing against it, it can just show you how abrasive the paper is becoming with the high points. I suppose it's like sandpaper a little bit. You've got the rough bits which take off the main edges, and the smaller parts of the grit and grain of the paper just take it off on a finer level. Let's give it fold number 14 and see how we pull up. Okay, here we have fold number 14, and as you can see, particularly the bottom edges, or just happens to be the edge which is closest to the camera, there is some very, very high points indeed, especially the corner. See, I can slide my finger underneath there, and that's just the edge of the paperwork. See, I can slide my finger right through this high point there. This side's not so bad yet, but the middle part of the paper is staying surprisingly intact. We can see, you know, it's still got those ridges through there, some deep cracks. There's a little bit more red discoloration on the high points there, but I think that's probably about as bad as we're going to get. We'll give it fold number 15 and see how that transpires. Back in a moment. Okay, this is fold number 15, and to me it definitely looks like a used tissue. When you have a bit of a runny nose and you blow it and then discard the tissue, and it is very, very scrunched up, and it doesn't sit very flat at all, as you can see here. We've still got a lot of high points around the edges. The corners are really starting to ruffle themselves right up. If you look at the side profile there, you can see that it's not very flat. And that rip that we had there originally in the first video, it's not really opening up. It's a bit of a surprise, but maybe the next few goes it might. We'll give it fold number 16, and again we'll examine it. Be back in a moment. Okay, we've got fold number 16 out the way. You probably can't see in the background because it's a bit dark. I'm just sitting at my kitchen bench, which seems to be my laboratory test station. We've got a lot of little fibres, little dust fibres, just floating up into the atmosphere like this. It's a bit of floating around, and I think it's just the actual fibres on the paper starting to deteriorate, and there's a bit of breeze through the house, just the normal circulation of air through the house, and that's wafting them through. You can't see it because the particles are so fine, but it's definitely happening. I have allergies, maybe that might set them off. We'll see if that does as well. You can see lots of high points on the edge of the paper here. Again, I can put my fingers under the edges quite easily, and this is how the paper's starting to look. You know, again, there's not much more deterioration of the ink onto the paper, but you can see some red discoloration there still in these little areas here. The black ink's probably soaked into the paper as much as it is. There's lots of little tears starting to open up. I don't know if you can see these little tears here. There's a few little tears in there and a few there. That's probably some of the high traffic areas. We'll give it fold number 17 and see if we can make it to 20. Okay, there's fold number 17 out the way, and again, it seems to be the edges taking all the punishment here. They're really starting to fray around the edges and rip and break. It's a bit like split ends on your hair, if you have ever had that type of thing. I don't really look after my hair as well as I should, but I don't have split ends. I suppose some people are predisposed to it. The corners are very, very knotted and matted, and that's a bit of a surprise. It's, I suppose because it's the intersection of two straight edges, that's probably a weak point, and they're really starting to fold. As you can see, I can slide my finger underneath there, and there really is a very big gap. It's probably about 25 mils, which is an inch in the old language, and all the corners seem to be curling upwards. I don't think it's the way I'm unfolding the paper, because I'm doing it a different way each time for a bit of randomness, and I can see a bit more red ink is starting to seep into the same high points, which will probably weak spots in the paper, and because they're common points, common high points, that's probably where they're rubbing the most often, and therefore will probably be prone to get more ink, and there's a little bit more red ink starting to seep off on the left hand side here. We'll give it fold number 18 and we'll be back in a few seconds. I don't know if you can see any of these little dust particles floating around when I fold up the paper here. Just a few little wisps. It's only a cheap mobile phone that I have, and it's got a bad camera on it. You might have been able to see a few little wisps there. Well, this is fold number 18. We'll just straighten this up a little bit, and we'll give it the bounce test too. It's not really bouncing very much. There's no resistance there at all, and you can see there's a lot of rips and tears starting to open up, especially across this upper edge of the paper. I suppose because you've got some new rough areas here, that's where it's grabbing as you fold and be rubbing a lot more than normally. Unfolded, it still rubs like this. That's my theory behind it. Again, the edges are looking very, very deteriorated. That rip hasn't opened up. I think that's more or less the way it is, but there is a lot of cracks right in the corner there. I suppose if you crack the webbing of your finger there and you get a little split, it's a bit like that's where it is. That's where your two fingers are, and that's the weak point there, and that's the weak point here, and there's a lot of little holes in there developing. That's 18 fold and unfolds. We'll do 19 and we'll have a look at that. Okay, here's 19. We'll give it a little bit of a bounce test, and it doesn't. It sort of hits and goes floppy like that. I suppose there's no resistance from surface tension on the paper. There's so many folds and creases there, it would absorb the impact. Anyway, I've just ripped the paper a little bit more, but there's so many rips and tears in there that it doesn't take a whole lot, and I'm trying to be gentle unfolding, and I'm not even going to pull against the tension of the paper there. I'll just unfold it as best I can without giving it much of an effort, and it really is looking quite ragged. We've still got another fold to go, and again we've still got the high points here, very rough on the edges. The corners are looking pretty ragged. There's not much more deterioration with the ink seepage. There's a little bit of the red hues around there. I think that's about as bad as it's going to get. Paper's probably too soft now to be abrasive, and there's so many more cracks and tears in it, it's starting to look a bit like a grater, a food grater. We'll give it fold number 20 and have a look and see how that is. Okay, there we have the 20th fold. A little bit of a bounce there, but I suppose it landed on the bench the right way. Let's try to gently unfold it. It really is very grippy, the fibres of the paper against itself, and I think that's about as good as I'm going to get it without actually ripping it. You can see that there's so many more tears, these black spots and tears in there in the paper. You could see daylight through that, so I might try to get a daylight shot after this little fold here, just for some comparison. Might even use that as a thumbnail for this video. See some sunlight behind all the holes. So there you have it. There's the new tear that's open up. I can't even tell where the original tear was. I think it was about here somewhere, but the edges are so ragged. So there's a piece of paper that's been folded and unfolded 20 times. And we'll compare that to a pristine sheet of paper. We'll put them side by side as we did in the first video. And as you can see, I'll just move the camera up a little bit higher. There is a very large distinction between sizes. I'd say it's lost easily 40% of its length, and width-wise, it's probably lost maybe 25-30%. We'll place this sheet, bear in mind it's been folded and unfolded 20 times on top of an original piece of paper, and there you have it. That is a very big surprise. We can still see the outside edges where I put that black border around it like a picture frame, just for a bit of scale, and it's virtually non-existent. It's deteriorated to the point when it's not even rectangular anymore. Well, it's sort of rectangular. You can see all these rips and holes developing. Surprising that these two ink spots, the test spots, are in such a good condition. They still maintain their colour. You can easily distinguish them as the black and red spots. It's a good marking point for the paper. As you can see, that red discoloration, a little bit of black and a lot of holes. So there we have it. There's this piece of paper that's been folded and unfolded 20 times. Seeing as it's more or less basically still in one piece, I might see if we can get a few more folds out of it in the next video. I'm going to look after this piece of paper and put it somewhere where it won't be in harm's way and keep it in this condition as much as I can. And I thank you for watching.